Welcome to Exclusive on France 24. We're in Cairo at the Presidential Palace. Our guest is the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Hello, President.
Hello.
With me interviewing is Sonia Dridi, our correspondent in Cairo.
President, thank you for meeting with us. You're about to take your first official trip to Europe after your election. You first went to Africa, then to Moscow, and then New York. What are your expectations in Europe, in particular in France? What kind of partnerships are you considering?
Well, first of all, allow me to commend the French people, because the relations between Egypt and France have been and are still strong. My visit to France and to Italy is within the framework of the efforts made in order to re-establish the role of Egypt and to explain the situation prevailing in Egypt to the Europeans, so for them to understand better what's happening in Egypt and in the area.
President, we know that you've launched a major deficit reduction program in Egypt. We also know that you want to attract foreign investors. Could you tell us whether the contracts being negotiated with France, particularly military contracts, there are 2 naval corvettes at an advanced stage of negotiations, but there's also talk of possible purchase of 24 Rafale fighters by the army. What is the likelihood that will come to pass?
Well, regarding the contracts and the military relations with France, they didn't start today. We have fighters Mirage 5, Mirage 2000, and ground-to-air defense. We have Crotale, we have the Milan against tanks. I mean, we have military relations going back to very long years, and we hope those relations to carry on. Regarding the new contracts, it depends upon what France could deliver to Egypt in this difficult situation. If France understands the current situations and gives us some facilities, well, it's going to be an important factor for the implementation of future contracts. Will France better understand our economic situation or not? We shall see.
Let's go back to current events in Egypt. Since you removed President Mohamed Morsi following the massive street demonstrations, the forces of law and order were targeted by almost daily attacks, in particular in the Sinai. At the end of October, 28 soldiers were killed in a single attack. Just 2 weeks later, the jihadi group Ansar Bet al-Mahdi swore allegiance to the Islamic State groups. Does that represent a turning point in your security approach? Are you going to be more involved in the international coalition against the Islamic State groups?
Regarding the fight against terrorism, we started our efforts for over a year. We are part and parcel of this coalition. We make those efforts at home in Egypt, in the Sinai, on the western borders, on the southern borders. We made efforts even before this coalition against the Islamic State group. We call for a coalition against extremism for several years. The fight against terrorism should not be only from a military point of view. To deal with this phenomenon, measures will have to be taken, a whole array of measures from an economic, social, cultural, security point of view and political point of view.
President, even so, there was the attack in the Sinai, there was the statement by Ansar Bet al-Mahdi. You're setting up a buffer zone in Rafah. It would seem that these terrorists are in open defiance of you and that you're having a lot of trouble controlling them.
The buffer zone should have been established for years already. Why so? Because this buffer zone is impacting the region of Sinai and the security in Egypt, generally speaking. I don't want to say that this decision has been taken late. We took this decision in consultation with the local population. Meetings have been organized in order to compensate them, of course, and to rebuild the new city of Rafah for it to be more pleasant to live in.
But the inhabitants in the Sinai have complained about having to leave their homes within 48 hours. There have been many, many complaints from inhabitants in the Sinai. Do you think this buffer zone is the best solution at the present time?
The buffer zone is part of a solution. It's a main part of the solution. We have borders, direct borders between the local population, the Egyptian population, and the Gaza Strip. Obviously, this area was not fully controlled in terms of activities or trafficking. Moreover, in our struggle against terrorism, we always tried to do the utmost to spare the lives, human lives, lives of civilians. We always respected the human rights. It was something very important for us. This, of course, in touch with the local population. It is not a constraint for 24, 48 hours. There have been consultations. They understood our position. They understood the interest of the national security. They accepted this for the interest of their country. And this is something that we shall not forget. We'll do our best to rehouse them nearby.
Over and above the difficulties in the Sinai, there is chaos in Libya. You share 1,200 kilometers of border. In Libya, there's fighting between militia groups. There are two competing governments. Daesh has its own territory in the Derna region, and it has been said in Western military circles that Egypt and the Emirates conducted military strikes in August. They say that Egypt once again intervened near Benghazi. You've always denied this, and yet if the Americans and the Westerners are intervening militarily in Iraq and Syria, why can't you admit that Egypt is acting in Libya for the sake of its own security?
Let me be crystal clear with you. Had we been intervening directly, I wouldn't have hesitated to say it loud and clear. This must be crystal clear. Whatever we have been doing until today is to support the national Libyan army and the Libyan parliament through the Libyan government. I'm stating it again. If we make any intervention directly, I will state it openly. Until now, we are providing support to the national Libyan army to secure Libya. We, as international community, Europeans and Americans, we ought to strengthen the national Libyan army to fight against terrorism and secure the country.
Meaning then, no Egyptian military aircraft, nor Egyptian armed forces in Libya? Clear.
Yes, it's clear. Absolutely clear. We have neither air force nor ground force in Libya. What we are doing, we are securing the borders from the Egyptian side.
France is present in the northern part of Niger with Operation Barkhane, very close to the southern part of Libya where there's intense fighting. Does Egypt want France to support more actively the authorities in Tobruk in their fight against Islamic militias?
The situation in Libya requires more interest. We must see what is the work that has been done. A work that hasn't been finalized. The regime has been defeated. However, the institutions the Libyan institutions have not been given back to the Libyan people. After the fall of the regime, foreign forces left Libya, leaving the weapons and militias that are reigning everywhere. The efforts are beyond France and Italy. It's a common effort so that Libya would become again a normal state and not a zone of attraction for the terrorists within the Mediterranean, a kind of nuisance for the neighbors and for Europe.
Are you in favor of an international coalition to restore order in Libya? And would you say that, as it were, by concentrating on the Islamic State groups in Iraq and Syria, the international community is forgetting Libya, which is potentially just as dangerous?
We are at a very critical time. One should fight against all the extremism. We said it from the very beginning of the constitution of the coalition against the Islamic State group. We drew the attention to the situation in Libya. We have to deal with extremism as a unit. If we deal with terrorism in Iraq and Syria, terrorists will come to Libya, and instability will have an output not only in Libya, but in the whole area. So the same measures taken now in Iraq and in Syria should be applied also in Libya to control those people and strengthen the states.
Last weekend, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain reached a reconciliation agreement with Qatar, accused of actively supporting the Muslim Brotherhoods. You applauded that agreement. Let's not forget that Egypt recalled its ambassador from Doha at the beginning of the year. Is Egypt ready to normalize its diplomatic relations with Qatar?
Wait and see. Wait and see the outcome.
The main source of tension between you and Qatar is known to be their alleged support for the Muslim Brotherhood. Is it your feeling that Qatar is perhaps changing its position relative to the brothers? We know, for instance, that a few leaders were expelled 2 months ago.
I would like to allude to the communiqué we released yesterday to answer positively to the appeal launched by the King of Saudi, King Abdullah. We highlighted in this communiqué that we shall prepare the ground for a more positive position. We start to do this as of today. I think it's an answer to your question.
A word about another country with which you have strained relations. I think it's fair to say that, Turkey. President Erdogan never misses an opportunity to criticize you, and he says you're a despot. And incidentally, he snubbed you at the UN General Assembly. What's your response?
What I mean to tell you is that since June the 30th, July 3rd, we didn't try to start an escalation with any country as of today.
The United States has announced that they were going to be delivering to Egypt 10 Apache helicopters. In fact, they had suspended part of their aid following the July 3rd events and the crackdown on the demonstrations in August of 2013. Does this mean that today military cooperation with the United States is totally restored?
Look, you asked me earlier a question about the 1,200 kilometers with Libya. We also have 1,000 kilometers of borders with the Sudan, plus borders with the Gaza Strip and Israel. This is a very large area. We need extremely important forces. We need modern equipment to avoid human losses. The delivery of those 10 helicopters with 12 F-16 has been planned for over a year. Maybe it's the beginning of the delivery, which has been suspended since this time.
But do you still need the United States quite as much? You've been talking to Moscow, to Paris. Do you still need their help?
Our relations with the U.S. are strategic. We have relations with France, with Italy, and other countries around the world. And those relations are not made at the expense of other countries.
President, let me now turn to the situation in Israel and Palestine. There's been the war in Gaza. There's been a resumption of fighting in Jerusalem. Is it your feeling that we're heading into an all-out clash between Israelis and Palestinians? And in fact, there's even talk of a third intifada.
I really wish to seize this opportunity today in order to solve this issue once and forever. I am addressing all those who are listening to us in France, in Europe, to the people of France, to the people of Europe, peace-loving people. We have now an occasion to diffuse this crisis which has an impact on the whole area. The Palestinians, on the one hand, are frustrated, are disappointed, are hopeless. On my behalf, when I talk to Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, I always tell him, we need to deliver some hope to the Palestinians. We have to give them a state to the Palestinians so they could live in peace alongside with the Israeli people. And I restate it here. We all need, as states, peace-loving states, wishing to live in peace in this area. We must provide all the guarantees for the emerging Palestinian state and for the state of Israel, so that none of the two countries be a danger for the other country. Without this, the tension will last and instability will last too. With a courageous process, the deal will change. Who could have believed that for 40 years that the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel has been signed would last so long? Maybe sometimes there is some bad feelings regarding this treaty. I think that courage to take this initiative will create a new deal that will be imposed to the whole area. And on our side, we are ready to contribute to deliver guarantees for peace without a danger for the Palestinians or for the Israelis.
The interests between Egypt and Israel have never converged as much, in particular in the fight against terrorism in the Sinai. Do you agree with Israel that Hamas should be eradicated?
Let me tell you something. When we take measures in the Sinai, those measures aim at confirm our sovereignty over the Sinai, which is part and parcel of the Egyptian territory. We will never allow anyone to launch attacks from our territory against the neighbors or against Israel. Moreover, we cannot defuse the crisis or find a solution to this issue unless an important initiative is being taken. What would be this initiative? Is to tell the Palestinians, you are entitled to a state like the Israelis. I think this would solve lots of issues that are facing every day our region. We should not forget that one of the causes of terrorism is the Palestinian issue.
But, President, after the attacks in the Sinai, and in particular the attack we mentioned earlier on, accusations were leveled against Hamas directly by Egyptian officials. So what I want to know is it your view that there's a connection between Hamas and Ansar Bait al-Maqdis? And would you say that that Hamas is one and the same thing as the Islamic State groups?
أنا عايز أقول لك إن الأفكار المتطرفة
In my opinion, extremist thoughts, or what is called political Islam, have the same roots. One cannot separate the Islamic State group from what's happening in Afghanistan or from the group Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis. We cannot separate those groups, and we should not separate them. This is why I said that the confrontation, the approach, shouldn't be only military, but it is about a global confrontation, because the outcome of the activity of those groups are felt not only in the region, but everywhere through Europe and elsewhere on the globe. I'm not talking about military measures, I'm talking about global measures.
The Egyptian authorities have cracked down on the Muslim Brotherhood, and thousands of them have been thrown into prison. In Tunisia, where presidential elections are going to be taking place in a few days, they accepted their defeat. They've played the electoral game. Isn't this proof that the Muslim Brotherhoods can be integrated into democracy?
أنا عايز أقول لك إن مهم قوي إن تعرفي إن مصر.
What I mean to tell you is really that you have to know that the Egyptian population is amounting to 90 million people. With all my friendship towards Tunisia, the Tunisian population is only 1/10 of the Egyptian population.
كل المصريين يعيشوا باختلاف أفكارهم.
We have all the conditions for Egyptians to live in peace. We're not against such or such thought. We're against the fact that a thought should be imposed by force. We have this issue. You alluded to the repression. We are talking here in Egypt about the exceptional circumstances. You, in Europe, you must be aware to this will of the Egyptian people who refused this regime of the Muslim Brotherhood. We took no exceptional measure on June 30th, on July 3rd, or July 7th. We invited everybody so that everybody could take part into the political process, but they didn't do it. They used violence as a means. This is the doctrine of political Islam.
According to several human rights organizations, the crackdown is even more severe than it was under Mubarak, in particular as regards secular activists. Thousands of them are in prison, and there's also journalists, in particular journalists for Al-Jazeera, who've been in prison for close to a year. Recently, you issued a decree that would enable you to transfer the indictees that are not of Egyptian origin back to their country of origin. Does that mean that the Australian Peter Grest and Mohammed Fahmy, an Egypto-Canadian, will soon be able to go back home?
First of all, I'd like to tell you that this is tremendous figures. We don't have the means to jail tens of thousands of people. You should check the figures. Then, the decision to arrest those people were taken when I was not in charge then. Well, had I been in charge then, I would have preferred arrest them and send them back to their countries of origin, and this in the supreme interest of Egypt. And the whole issue would be over with. There is a very important point for us. You, in your own countries, you respect law, you respect the decisions of the courts, you don't criticize them. Why can't you understand that it's the same thing for us in Egypt? We have laws, we have courts, judges that must be respected, and their decisions must also be respected.
Today you're in power. Could you grant them the presidential pardon?
I can tell you that this is something which is under scrutiny to find a solution.
Do you anticipate making such a decision in the near future? As in the West, it is within your presidential powers.
If we consider that this is in the national interest of Egypt, we'll do it.
Thank you, President, for meeting with us. And now for the news on France 24.